We begin today by acknowledging the Turrbal people, the traditional custodians of the land in which we gather today, and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We would like to extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who view this presentation. Good morning everyone, my name is Lockie and this is Avindu. And today we would just like to sit down and have a little yarn about our experiences when visiting Kabingai Youth and Family Development Centre. But first we'd just like to introduce ourselves. So my name is Lockie Crook and I am in my final semester of my secondary education masters majoring in music and drama. I have lived in Brisbane most of my life. I went to school here, I grew up here, I did my undergraduate degree here. I did spend a few years living in the UK, so I do have a deep love of different cultures. However, unfortunately, I know very little about my own country's culture, aside from what maybe I learnt in school, which was always very base level and not overly detailed about the histories or the cultures or the practices of the traditional owners of the land. So I was very interested and very excited to take this trip to Kabingai with Avindu and really delve into the programs they run and the work that they do.
Hi, my name is Uvindu Pratapasinghe. I was born and raised in Sri Lanka, and I just arrived in Australia for this Masters in Teaching just last year. I did my bachelor's in Greek and Roman studies in Sri Lanka about 10 years ago. I too am in my final year here, just like Lucky, and I'm specializing in history and English.
Okay, so last week Avindu and I had the privilege of visiting the Kabingai Youth and Family Development, which is a not-for-profit community-controlled organisation which provides education, training and social well-being to Indigenous Australian peoples with an emphasis on assisting the Turrbal people, members of the Turrbal people. Just as a bit of background, the Turrbal people are the traditional owners of the Brisbane area and a large portion of southeast Queensland. We were lucky enough to meet with Kevin, who is the Senior Cultural Engagement and Community Development Advisor at Kabingai. It's quite a mouthful, he's an important man. And we just had the opportunity to sit down and yarn with him for the afternoon while he explained the kind of work that they do at Kabingai, the kind of support they offer, which was a wonderful afternoon, really wonderful afternoon. We learned so much about what they do there. First things first, Kabingai is a Turrbal word, which was given to the centre, which means the transition from boy to man, which is really in keeping with the values of family and youth development. And speaking to Kevin, we found out that there's just so much going on at Kabingai, so many programs that they offer. These include child safety programs, which offer holistic family programs or referral programs, just depending on the individual who needs assistance. And they also offer educational services that work within schools, family safety with a focus on family improvement, language connection and occupational training, be that assisting their members in finding a job or assisting them with training for a specific trade. And finally, they just kind of offer overall mental and social well-being programs, don't they? There's just so much going on. I remember when he was explaining it to us, and I didn't really know what to expect going into this, just like what they actually offer. I knew it was youth and family development, but I had no idea how many just like things that they offer, how many programs and how much work that they actually do. And I remember there was one point in the afternoon where I spoke to some of the staff at Kabingai. I actually went out for a coffee and I spoke with some of the staff just in their little yarning area. And one of them told me that having an organisation for this, for the members of the community, it just really increases a sense of family and community and just a general sense of safety for the young people that it supports. And one thing that really stuck with me was when one of the staff told me that like some of the members, they only spend like say an hour a week there at Kabingai, but that hour can sometimes mean the difference between getting into legal trouble and staying out of it. And I found that to be really quite powerful, and I think that sense of family and community is arguably the most important aspect of an organization like this. So going into this experience, I was very interested in the education portion of their services, being a previous service teacher myself. I'm sure you felt the same.
Yeah.
So we obviously asked Kevin how we could possibly integrate some of their methods of learning into our own pedagogy, so as to incorporate teaching methods that are in line with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander values. And I think the main theme that emerged was that their education methods, their history, their stories, and the music, they're all passed down orally. And we, of course, refer to this as auditory oral education, which focuses on maximizing a student's auditory, listening, speech, and language skills. Ideally teaching the students to use their functional hearing to assist with their development of spoken language. But what I found interesting was that Kevin really made a point of simplifying this entire process, which eventually becomes a yarn. Now, personally, at the beginning of this unit, this specific unit, I was a little confused about the structure of a yarn, what it entailed, how exactly to do it, how to accomplish it. And speaking to Kevin just really helped me understand this, because what really stood out to me is that he said that most people do it without realizing. It's just a conversation, storytelling, recollection, that kind of thing. And of course, everyone does it all the time. So it's something he said to me which stuck out to me, which was, I thought it was a really nice way of saying it. It's all about sharing and learning, and when you teach someone verbally, they will then pass it on. And I think that really sort of explained the idea of a yarn to me, which is what I wanted to understand.
100%. Look, it's quite simple, and people do it all the time without realising it. The easiest way that I could talk about it is you go home, you've got Nan and Pop, you've got Mum and Dad, you've got Uncle and Auntie, a family gathering, and all of a sudden someone kicks off, or it might be, oh Nana, what are you cooking? And then she starts describing what goes on there, and then Dad will pipe in and go, oh, I remember how Mum used to make this, and that's basically what it is. Yeah. It's knowledge gathering, but in a way that's very simplistic. You're not sitting here with a notebook writing it down, taking notes. It's about how you capture that, and that's the hardest part. Like, I guess when talking about, there's no real written history of Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's more an oral history or a pictorial history, or you'll appreciate this as with your music major, music, song, dance. That's how those stories were passed across. There was no written language within Aboriginal culture.
Now, as a music and drama teacher, I think this would be a really effective practice to implement into my own pedagogy, specifically with music. In the Australian curriculum, which we use in Queensland until Year 10, the students are required to use their oral skills to recognise elements of music and memorise aspects of music like pitch and rhythm sequences. And I think implementing an oral method of learning, like Kevin was describing to us, would really engage the students with active listening, which is absolutely crucial in music. And he really went on about this active listening, and that's part of what he has been taught his entire life. That's part of the yarn. It's active listening, and he described his skill of being able to recall any random song lyric or line of dialogue from a movie with just at the drop of a hat, just like that. And he said his friend said to him once, if you could do that with like algebra, you'd be a genius. And he just said, it doesn't work like that. It's just all about active listening.
Now, for me, I don't know why, but for stuff like this story, finding out information, what else would I say? Lyrics, song title, movies, movie lines. Amazing. Mate of mine said, bro, if you could remember algebra the way that you do, you know, a throwaway line from some movie that no one ever watched in 1983, he said, you'd be a genius. And I said, it just don't work like that. So, you know what I mean, like these yarns, I remember, but it's also the art of listening. When I listen to music, I listen to it. And I know that might sound silly, but I do. I'm involved. I'm not trying to listen. It's not background music. It's not something that's playing while I listen. And I can pretty much recite, you know, any song that I sing and play when I play guitar and sing. I got the lyrics down pat.
What also stood out to me about the education methods at Kabingai was Kevin's encouragement of immersion in different cultures, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. When speaking about some of the events Kabingai was involved in, he encouraged everyone to come in and celebrate their culture, and if they didn't know anything about it, just ask. Just ask. Like, he was so willing to educate and share. And it all comes back to using every opportunity for sharing and learning. And I think cultural immersion is a foundational concept of education because it encourages teachers and students to engage with a range of cultures, practices, languages, just as a means of learning about the world. And Kevin and Kabingai really encouraged this. And so did Uncle Alex. We were lucky enough to, it's totally serendipitous, we were lucky enough to have one of the elders of Kabingai, Uncle Alex, join our yarn, and he enforced this technique of immersion by saying that the best thing teachers and pre-service teachers can do for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures is just better understanding, engage with it, immerse yourself in it, and we found that to be really, really powerful.
In our yarning with Kevin, right, like you mentioned earlier, I too came to see that Kabingai,
Yes,
Kabingai appears to offer a variety of initiatives to promote welfare and growth, notably for the children, families, and youth. It was wonderful to see that they provide sort of tailor-made things, right? Not just one-size-fits-all programs, but you know, for their individual members of the community. So they seem to be emphasizing on occupational training and establishing linguistic connections, especially because they are essential elements for boosting one's, I suppose, social mobility and economic mobility. Additionally, their initiatives for mental and social well-being show that they sort of recognize and value the overall health of their neighbors in the community. In general, it is evident that this Kabingai is committed to having a positive influence on their community and giving its residents the tools that they need to realize their dreams. So, as the session went on with Kevin, we had this delightful and unplanned encounter with Uncle Alex. I noticed that they're being called Uncle.
Yeah, it's what they call their elders.
Nice.
Yeah.
So any stranger, though not related to you, would be called Uncle.
Well, I actually, I wouldn't even know, to be honest. Like, I was wondering if we were allowed to call him Uncle Alex. Like, you might have noticed, like, on the day I was just calling him Alex, I was like, am I allowed to say it?
Yeah, I remember a similar thing in Sri Lanka. Strangers, those who are not related to you, they're called uncles and aunties.
Okay.
Just the English part, not in singular, not in our language, because we're not related to them.
Yeah.
But that uncle part is there. Now, it's an English word. So what I was thinking was perhaps that is a residual a remnant of the colonial period.
Yeah, okay.
So these little things were left behind, and they're being used to sort of establish a connection, because English is, after all, it's a lingua franca, right? So it establishes, a connecting language between different cultures, different people who speak
Right,
other languages.
okay,
That's
okay.
lingua franca, right? So I thought, so that is used to establish a connection. So in the same way here also the same thing happening perhaps. So it's easier to feel connected at once. So it's easier to exist in the same community. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
So this Uncle Alex, he's a really old person, right? I don't know, 80 something.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Well, he was part of the stolen generation, so he's really quite old.
So he went on to tell us these anecdotes. Right? I really, by the way, I really didn't know that kangaroos were eaten.
Did you not?
No. It was a shocking surprise.
No. You can buy them at Woolies.
He went on to tell us this story about this kangaroo point, how the name came to be, and these kangaroos were apparently killed and for meat, and also for their hide. So I actually looked into it and found out this Australian word called fellmongery. Have you heard of it?
No.
It means skinning something for its hide.
Okay. Yeah. To make like pelts and
Yeah.
materials and whatnot.
So in Uncle Alex's yarning, which went on for quite some time, as you know, old people tend to do that, and I loved it. I sort of noticed, various emotions. I don't know, maybe I read it that way or not. He was sort of longing for the time that was gone. A tinge of sadness, perhaps, because they talked about how these in the world was they were not allowed to recruit the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And before I asked why, he said because they're too dark. That was the excuse the officers gave. So that was so heartfelt, sobering. Yeah. So despite these little heartbreaking anecdotes, I found myself quite listening to it quite intently, because I could relate to his yarning on two ways. One being that I'm also coming from an island. Australia is a huge island. It's an island nation that was once under the shackles of the British, right? So that's I sort of sharing with his unpleasant memories, though not personally, of course. Not personally.
You're not?
Not personally, but And secondly, because I remember my grandfather when I was quite young. I had like 12 cousins, so we would gather around him and he would tell us stories and about how it was, how it used to be when he was young, before the British came and all that. So on that positive note also, I could relate to Uncle Alex and that whole experience. Yeah, it was a good day.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
And when I met with Kevin, he did explain what Kabingai meant and how to pronounce it. We had different pronunciations before we went there.
I think I was calling it Kabingai. I felt so bad about it.
So he explained that it means something like a rite of passage. Right? So for my bachelor's, I studied ancient Greeks and Romans.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So in it, in the classical Greece, we have this coming of age rite of passage sort of thing, where older men would teach younger men how to behave, how to function as a how to have their progeny and all that. So I thought perhaps this is what he means by rite of passage,
Yeah.
in boyhood to manhood. And I did want to ask him a little bit more about it, but then I thought it unwise because he sort of implied that there is this sort of solemnity around it. He said that girls are not allowed around the thing, so that's what it means, solemnity. So okay. So I teach English and history for secondary school students, and I thought of incorporating yarning as an act of engaging in meaningful discussions for higher grades. They would have a lot to say.
Yeah.
For example, if you take something like Shakespeare, right? Macbeth or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So they would have a greater comprehension of the various worldviews through yarning about this play and all that. So, Kevin at the center mentioned that when asked what ways of education they employ, like you too mentioned earlier, his response was revolving mostly around conversations that they had, discussions. They're not discussion. When I say discussions, it becomes academic, but that's not what he meant by yarning. It's a very cozy gathering, right? That
Yeah.
sort of thing. So
We just talk. We talk it. Yeah. I don't know. Do you still speak your traditional language?
oh yes.
Nice. So I know that, and I learned this yesterday because a gentleman that I met. There are sort of 2 or 3 different mobs or people where you come from. You've got Sinhalese. What else is there? He said something else. It starts with M. Does it start with M? Like just almost like factions or groups of
From
people
the
in
same
Sri Lanka.
language,
Yeah.
there are different vernaculars. Like in southern part of the country, they speak the same language, but it's sort of different. Their colloquialism is different from the Kandy, and Colombo is sort of different.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a bit westernized in Colombo.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't trying to think. I just had a yarn with the lad the other day because I'm interested in that too. As much as people learn from culture our ways, it's good for us to learn same. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I only literally had a conversation with a gentleman yesterday that said he was from Sri Lanka and was having that yarn.
So this practice of yarning is included in the Ekara syllabi, right? This acknowledges the value of and necessity for including indigenous knowledge, viewpoints, and modes of knowing in education. So as teachers, I suppose, we can contribute to the development of inclusive learning environments and foster respectful discourse between indigenous and non-indigenous students in Australian classrooms by including yarning. Right? And students get a chance to share knowledge and get a greater understanding of various worldviews.
The first activity would be used as a warm-up activity for a music classroom from anywhere between years 1 and 9. It's very much an earlier sort of exercise. And it actually takes a suggestion from Kevin to make use of oral education. And this activity will engage the students in a song called Taba Naba, which is a traditional song and dance from Torres Strait Island. The students will sing in the native language of Torres Strait Island while performing actions that relate to the lyrics, and there are specific actions for this song, the wiggles to it. This activity would not require any materials and would be taught by the teacher entirely via oral transmission, as it is done in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education. So this will not only engage the students in the Australian Curriculum Achievement Standard of oral skills, but will incorporate content and learning methods of the culture from where it came from in a non-tokenistic kind of way, in a very respectful way. And engaging with this kind of material and learning technique would equitably incorporate the education of methods of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. Kevin made a point of stating that inclusivity generates interest and discussion, not just with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, but all other cultures as well. For this to be incorporated, it should be established early in the school year that all cultures should be celebrated within the classroom. So this has inspired the second activity. This would be aimed, once again, at earlier years, but it could also be used in the first lesson or the first week of any year level. It's a good introduction sort of lesson. So the students would be set the task of drawing the cultural flag that they identify with. Now this doesn't necessarily have to represent a geographical location. This could be the pride flag or anything that the student feels represents them. They would then share a piece of information about why they identify with this flag with the rest of the class. These flags would then be displayed around the classroom for the rest of the year, ideally. And an activity like this promotes inclusion of students from all cultures and teaches the students to include and celebrate every culture in school. And I should also say that this activity could also be done when attending a centre like Kabingai in the interest of celebrating all cultures. Kevin was very adamant about celebrating all cultures, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islands. So this could be used as an intro to a centre like this.
All right. So now I teach English and history. So the two activities here are focusing on English, but I think they're applicable to history as well. So for younger grades, for grades 7 to 9, yarning can be used in an interactive activity of collaboratively creating a fictional story. Now, before we begin, I think it is very important for this younger generation to understand how yarning differentiates from traditional Western storytelling.
Yeah.
So I think you also mentioned some of these aspects. Yarning is a collaborative
Yes.
and interactive method that sort of encourages the exchange of knowledge and tales. It's a holistic approach, right, which values actively listening and being polite, polite communication, while incorporating emotions, cultural context, relationships, whereas typical Western storytelling is frequently centered on individual expression and entertainment with a more passive listener. So the first activity includes a yarning technique through which we're going to put together a narrative. So here's how I was thinking it might go. We might break the class into several groups and choose a genre like mystery or science fiction or whatever. And the first chapter will be written collaboratively by all of us, including the teacher and the students. However, at least one paragraph has to be contributed by each member. So we can use a yarning stick. We could pass it around.
Yeah, that's good.
So each person, whoever gets it, has to type out. That will be easier than writing, I suppose, whatever means available. Right. Has to type out that paragraph, and everyone will read through it, and we will pass it to the next person, and he or she has to come up with the next paragraph. So to build this story, we'll have to employ active listening and being respectful for one another's viewpoints. So after the first chapter is done, we'll pick a different narrator for every subsequent chapters and so on. So for senior levels, I think years 10 to 12, it's crucial to have a thorough and interesting teaching strategy that takes into account various learning styles. For teaching something like, let's say, Shakespeare's Macbeth. A theatre educator called Gavin Bolton stated that tableaus of play scenes can aid students in understanding and appreciating the characters and action in the play. So using the indigenous yarning circle method as advocated by various educational academics like Dr. Martin Nakata, can also give students a sort of a secure and encouraging environment in which to express their experiences and connect them to the themes of the play. That would be the activity. Let's take one theme, for example, power and corruption. Macbeth. It's a recurring theme,
Yeah.
right? So this would give the students the chance to, improve both their personal and socio-emotional development, as well as their understanding of the play by combining these approaches, such as several studies have demonstrated that including personal anecdotes and experiences in class activities can improve their engagement and motivation and increase the learning results. So through this, they can have a better learning experience. That's what I thought for the activities.
Yeah, definitely.